I stood there, staring at myself in the bathroom mirror, washing my face with cold water. My breath fogged up the mirror, then cleared again. My mind was still trying to find an explanation, a rational reason for everything that had just happened. But all I saw in the mirror was myself tired, bewildered. After a pretty incredible night with my wife, I'd been slapped both literally and figuratively. The shock was overwhelming, and my thoughts swirled around in my head like a hurricane. I wondered what I was going to do next. But then, before I could even answer that question, memories of the past flooded back, like someone had just thrown open a door that had been locked for years. Teresa Benjamin, née McDowell, was the woman I had been married to for 15 years. But in reality, we'd known each other since high school, 4 years more to be exact. To a select few, she was Susan, a nickname only a handful of her closest friends and I were allowed to call her. I remembered my younger, arrogant self, trying to prove something to everyone around me. But Susan, she never let me get away with it. She was outspoken, and she'd shut me down with cool indifference every time I asked her out. In public, we were always at odds. She never hesitated to argue with me, and more often than not, she came out on top. By senior year, I had learned to stay away from her. College was a turning point for me. I started to fit in more with friends, and that helped me realize I could do better by being true to myself. So the summer after my freshman year, I went back home for a party with some old high school friends. We were playing beer pong when another group walked in, and then in the middle of the crowd, I felt someone tap me on the shoulder. "Hey Dante," a familiar voice said as I turned around. Standing before me was Susan, with a seductive smile and a white halter top and ripped jeans. She looked completely different. It was like all those years apart had changed us both. But there was something in her eyes, a hidden anxiety, as if she was afraid I was going to reject her, just like she'd done to me before. "Hey Susan," I replied, cautiously but not hiding my surprise. A few social pleasantries passed, and then she blurted out, "If you're free this summer, maybe we can hang out." A date, but I couldn't believe my ears. Susan and I had an incredible time together. She was so different than the image I had of her in high school, always aloof and arrogant, but as we started talking more, I realized she was not only fun but also insightful and open. She admitted she'd thought I was a pompous jerk and had been in some serious relationships back then. I also honestly told her I'd had a similar impression of her, but had never given her the time of day to really get to know her. So we had an unforgettable summer, full of fun and laughter, and we spent most of our time together. But it wasn't all sunshine and roses. One night, we were at a dance club when things almost went south. Susan's ex-boyfriend, Andy, showed up drunk and out of line. He waltzed straight up to our table and asked her to dance, completely ignoring my presence. What surprised me most was Susan's agreeing and leaving the table to dance with him, without even looking back at me. 3 songs went by, and I sat there, simmering with rage. When she came back to the table, my flushed face said it all. "What?" Susan tried to deflect, but seeing my look, she stopped making eye contact. "Dante, Andy meant nothing. We were dating back in our junior year." I didn't know if Susan was being naive or purposefully trying to take the high ground, but I was tired of it. "Sure, but you're not seeing him now, right?" I asked, unable to hide the frustration in my voice. "Well, no," she shook her head. "Yet you still walk out and dance with him without a second thought." I continued, my voice rising. "If you two need to spend time together, go for it. I can leave." I realized I was becoming the person I used to be, impulsive and lacking control. But before I could say anything more, Susan snapped back. She wasn't waiting for an explanation from me. She unloaded her fury on me right there in the middle of the club. Her outburst was so powerful that I couldn't even react, just silently took it. When Susan's rage subsided, I tried to stay calm. "If you ever do that to me again," I said, my voice stern, "we're over, completely and forever." I got up and walked out of the club, leaving Susan behind. I decided to take my time walking to the parking lot, hoping she'd realize her mistake and chase after me. Just as I was opening my car door, Susan was there. "Please, Dante, don't leave," she pleaded. "I'm sorry." "Sorry for what?" I asked, my emotions bubbling to the surface. "Sorry for humiliating me and yourself? Or for disrespecting me by allowing Andy to drag you to the dance floor without a care in the world?" We sat in the car, talking for a long time. That night we both talked about Susan's anger and how it affected our relationship. It was the first serious conversation we'd had about loyalty, about the line between personal freedom and mutual respect. Eventually, she understood that her actions had crossed the line, and we found a new balance. It was a turning point for both of us. Susan slowly learned that there were limits in a relationship, and I began to understand that she needed her space, but not at the expense of respect. Things seemed to be settling down until I went over to her place the day before Thanksgiving. She came to the door with a somber look on her face. "I dropped out of school," she said, taking me by surprise. I had no idea what had happened. "Why?" I asked, trying to stay calm. "Social reasons," Susan said, explaining awkwardly about peer pressure, about not fitting in with the party-going lifestyle of college students. Even though I sympathized, I still felt worried. And then, just a few months later, our lives changed forever when Susan called and said she was pregnant. We married quickly, and both families were incredibly supportive. But everything happened so fast, and I felt like I was on a roller coaster with no brakes. Enzo was born, and we started a family life full of responsibilities. Susan and I had been through a lot together, from financial struggles to raising children. Yet, after all that, I realized that even though the love was still there, the pressure and unspoken tension had slowly built up. Years passed, and we had our daughter, Molly. Things seemed to be on track. I got a good job, and we bought our first house. But life's challenges never ceased. The conflict between personal desires and family responsibilities slowly drove a wedge between Susan and me. Then, our lives were thrown into a tailspin when Susan decided to join a reality TV show. She thought it was the solution to all our financial problems, but I saw it as a recipe for disaster. "I've figured out our money problems," she said softly and sweetly. I almost missed those words. Almost. What solution?" I asked, and bent down so I could look down at her. "A few weeks ago, I found an Instagram ad for a game show," she continued. "I applied, and I got in. The grand prize is $350,000. I felt like I couldn't breathe. I quickly pulled back from her and sat up. "You mean you got accepted? What game show, like Jeopardy?" I filled out the application, never thought I'd actually have a chance, but got a response from them last week. It's a reality show like a cross between Survivor and the show everyone watches. Oh, right, Big Brother. No way. Absolutely not. I was angry and stern, but I knew I also sounded a little pathetic. There's no way I'd let my wife go on one of those trashy shows and be exploited and abused, or worse. You know what happens on those shows, of course you do. You've watched some of them. "Come on, honey," she tried to soothe me. "It's not as bad as you think. There's nothing that's going to happen that will make you or the family look bad. I promise." I'd never let that happen. I took a few deep breaths. I shouldn't have to explain it to her in the first place, and I was extremely worried. "Susan, listen to me," I said again. "Those shows are all deep fake. The people on Big Brother are a bunch of aspiring Hollywood stage actors. 100% of the guys in our neighborhood could survive longer than anyone on Naked and Afraid or Alone. Hell, I'm not a survivalist, but even I know you fish on day one, eat like crazy, then spend your energy building shelter. Do it in any other order, you're dead, let alone wandering through the woods, looking for mushrooms, or trying to take down a mature black bear with a bow and arrow. So just the fact that they use real contestants or lie to you about it is enough of a red flag." That argument seemed to take the wind out of Susan's sails, but then she switched tactics and went on the offensive. "We need the money, Dante," she said. "If I win, it's life-changing money for us. If I come in second, it's still $100 grand. It's just a bunch of couples doing challenges." She wouldn't listen to reason. "So who is the better half of you?" "What?" she asked, not yet getting it. "You said couples," I answered her. "Who is your other half?" At least she blushed. "Couples, it's not really couples, it's more like teammates chosen before the first show airs." "Susan," I answered as sternly as I could, "there are clearly things you're not telling me. My answer is no. There's no way my wife is going to become a bimbo on some stupid reality show and ruin all our lives and reputations, no matter how much money is at stake." That's what got me the worst slap of my life. I stood in the bathroom, looking in the mirror. The man staring back at me looked like he'd aged a decade. The lines of exhaustion and disappointment were etched into my face. My shoulders slumped. I sighed, drying my face with a towel, but unable to shake the thoughts that were swarming in my head. Was it really over between Susan and me tonight? I'd never laid a hand on her, or any woman for that matter, but this time the feeling of helplessness and anger was so intense that I almost lost control. I walked into the room, cold and somber, meeting Susan's eyes. She sat there, silent, then spoke softly. "I'm sorry, I shouldn't have." I raised my hand, signaling for her to stop. "Not now," I said, cutting her off. "Not tonight. I can barely stand to look at you. I'm going to bed." I grabbed a pillow and turned away, but heard her call after me. "Wait, Dante," Susan almost begged, trying to keep her voice soft but unable to hide the anxiety. "We need to talk about this. I know you're angry. Let me explain." I stopped but didn't turn around, my voice betraying my irritation. I said, "Not now. I couldn't contain my anger. Tomorrow. I'm tired and losing my mind with you after all. Never mind." Susan was almost frantic as I walked towards the empty bedroom. "Dante, we don't have much time. My flight leaves Sunday afternoon to the island." I stopped dead in my tracks. The sense of disappointment and rage spread through me. I just tilted my head, turned back to look at her, my eyes sharp with scorn. "Perfect, Susan. You're a real piece of work, above all else." I knew I wouldn't get much sleep that night. Sleep would come and go like a boring golf game on TV. Every time I closed my eyes, I was remembering the situation where my life had suddenly become a dumpster fire. The world that I once controlled had become a chaotic mess. The next morning, after I had made coffee and sat down at the kitchen table, Susan walked in wearing her long bathrobe like every other Saturday morning. She sat across from me, her voice subdued. "Hey," she said softly. I simply grunted in reply, not looking at her. "First, I want to apologize for blurting that out to you last night. I know it was thoughtless. I've been meaning to tell you, for at least a week now, but I haven't been able to find the right words or the race of mine. The best time would have been before you decided to do it unilaterally. I couldn't resist a jab." She took a deep breath, and then spoke with a persuasive tone. "Can you let me explain without getting angry again?" It was the familiar look I had seen so many times, the look that used to melt me, but now it seemed pathetic rather than endearing. "Sure," I replied, trying to stay composed, "and sorry for losing my cool last night. We need to talk about this seriously." Susan looked at me, seemingly relieved that I was willing to sit down and listen. She regained her composure, but I wondered just how big a lie she was manufacturing. "Like I said," she started, "I saw an ad for the Island Fire show and applied, never thinking I'd get chosen. But last week they called and I was accepted. The show lasts 8 weeks with physical and mental challenges. Contestants from 2 teams get eliminated if they don't complete the tasks." She paused to look into my eyes, but I remained silent. "I know what you're thinking," Susan continued. "That this is a setup, a scheme to exploit people for sex on TV. But it's not. I asked all the right questions, and they gave me the official paperwork. I'll show you." "Susan," I said, my voice stiff, "that paperwork is written by the company's lawyers. You're going to get bamboozled, and by then it will be too late to turn back." She frowned, her expression betraying inner resistance. "We always get through tough times, right?" I reminded her. "But this time you're doing this without even thinking about us. Remember, we live in a small town. Your mistakes on this show will leave all of us under constant pressure and scrutiny. I want you to call them right now and withdraw." Susan shook her head. "I can't, Dante. I signed the contract. They'll sue us if I drop out. We don't have much for them to take besides this house." I cut her off, my voice laced with sarcasm. "No, not that," she replied. "I'm committed. I'm not doing anything that will jeopardize our marriage." "You already have," I sighed heavily. "You made this decision on your own, hiding it from me, and now you're trying to force it on me when it's too late." "We don't have much for them to take besides this house," I warned. "No," she looked left, then at me, then right. No, I'm committed. Why don't you understand? I'm not going to jeopardize our marriage, or our love." "You already have," I sighed dramatically. "You acted unilaterally. You shut me out of a decision that should have been ours. Then you kept it a secret, knowing you wouldn't get my approval. And then you blamed me the day before you had to leave. One day, damn it, Susan." I got loud and animated. I went downstairs to the bathroom and splashed some water on my face. That's when I realized how bruised my cheek was from her slap the night before. Damn her, I thought. Let her go and let the chips fall where they may. When I came back to the kitchen, Susan was looking at me with a look I found baffling. It was a mixture of smugness and remorse. "I'm sorry," she was at least sincere with that. "I broke your trust by not telling you first, but I knew you'd object." "You broke a lot more than that," I pointed out. "What about respect? Even when we've been extremely low on cash, have I ever made a decision behind your back? Have I ever been disrespectful to you like you were to me? Have I ever?" "We're in one of those dire straits situations, Dante," she interrupted. "I've figured out a way to fix it, not forever, but at least until you get a decent job. If you stop worrying about me embarrassing you, you'll see that it's the right thing. I want us to be able to afford Christmas this year, maybe take the kids someplace nice. I don't want to fight with you because we won't see each other for more than 8 weeks. I'm telling you now, I'm not going to embarrass you or the kids or anyone else. I hope you'll be proud of me when this is all over." I sat there, silent, just thinking. It occurred to me that for most of our marriage, I had deferred to her, at least delaying whenever possible. Because of the money problems, I had not been a good leader of the family, instead trying to please her during difficult times. Finally, I knew what to say. "Susan," I got up to face her, "I highly doubt that I will be proud of you when this is all over. But I want you to know that even if that happens, you and I still have a lot of major issues to work out when you get back. The kids are almost out the door, and it'll just be you and me before long. After this little circus, we'll need to recommit to our marriage, if we have one left, and maybe get some professional help to make it happen." For once Susan accepted me, this seemed unusual. It was a testament to how imbalanced our relationship was. She thanked me for giving her the chance, and again promised not to disappoint me. My wife spent the rest of the day telling the kids, our parents, and telling Peter, his wife, and all of her friends. Even Catherine showed up at our door around 5:30. I happened to answer. "Hey, Dante," she said more formally than usual. "May I come in?" I really didn't remember the last time she'd asked that question. "Sure," I looked at her skeptically. Susan walked into the room. "Oh, hi, Catherine," she said as if Catherine was there to take her to prom. "Thanks for dropping by. Let's go into the kitchen and I'll bring you up to speed. I completely trust you, but I know it's been a while since you've cared for the kids." I let the two of them get started, but then, about 10 minutes later, I joined them at the table. Susan was outlining who needed to be where and when. Catherine kept glancing at me, and it seemed that she only half listened to my wife as she talked about meals and after-school activities that required the kids to skip dinner. Enzo had his license and could use Susan's car to drive himself and his sister. As soon as they finished, Catherine got up, looking uncomfortable. I walked her to the front door. "How long have you known about this?" Catherine asked as I opened the door for her. "Last night, after the barbecue," I said gloomily. "Poor guy," she gently touched my cheek. "Well, I'll be here to help you for the 8 weeks. I'll be a good listener if you need me." I thanked my amazing neighbor and wished her a good night. In bed, Susan started right in. It was the familiar dance we had performed forever. "Oh, do you want to get a little frisky?" she asked seductively. "It's going to be a pretty dry spell for both of us." "We had sex on Friday," I replied emotionlessly. "I'm emotionally exhausted and need some sleep." Susan hesitated. It was slight, and someone who didn't know her like I did wouldn't notice. Then she reached for my shorts and started to stroke me. "Dante, I'm going to be away from you for 2 months, know you for 2 months. You don't want me now, but my love for you is strong enough to endure for us." She kept stroking, then whispered to me, "I want you to have a memory of us, of me. That will help us get through this, so we can continue when I get back. Don't deny me." Morning came and the sun poured into our bedroom. The worst part of the summer heatwave was that the temperature didn't break at night. I woke up with only the sheet covering my legs. Susan was up and moving, going back and forth from the bathroom to the bedroom. I quickly realized that she was busy packing. I had decided before going to sleep that I wasn't going to make it easy on her. In the light of a new day, I felt stronger about it. "Good morning, sleepyhead," Susan chirped at me. I sat up and glanced at her suitcase. It was our medium-sized travel bag, not the larger one in the set. We'd gotten them as a wedding present but rarely used them. Even a weekend getaway required Susan to pack almost everything she owned. I made a mental note of that. "Can you make breakfast this morning?" she sweetly asked. I was about to puke at her fake enthusiasm and her nonchalance, as if she wasn't abandoning her family for 8 damn weeks. Enzo was still asleep. He always slept in on Saturdays. Molly was getting ready for soccer practice. As a sophomore, I was proud that she was on the JV team. Morning passed quickly. Susan seemed focused and we interacted little. I drove my daughter to practice and then she had plans, so she said her heartfelt goodbyes to Mom before leaving. So then I drove my wife to the airport, most of the ride in complete silence. Finally, she found something to say. "Honey," she started. "I know you're worried. I know you don't like this at all. Remember my promise. Even if they make everything bad to boost ratings and viewership, remember it's all edited and it's not as bad as it looks." She didn't think I realized she was almost begging. "It doesn't make things any better," I replied. "Doesn't make me feel any better, either." "Sorry," she said as we stopped the car in the departure area. "Remember, I can't call you. Actually, my phone is at home. I left the show's paperwork in your laptop bag. There are a couple of numbers to call in case of an emergency." She wanted to make a big goodbye scene, but my heart wasn't having it. It was the first time I'd seen any real anxiety in her eyes. It almost made me smile. That night, I was surprised to get calls from both sides of the family. I was equally surprised at their treatment of me. "How could you let her do this?" Her father, Steve McDowell, berated me. "Are you crazy?" I tried my best to soothe their obvious fears in the only way I could. I lied. That night I steadied myself, enough to come up with at least the outline of a plan instead of facing a third consecutive night of little sleep. Consider that, if everything went right, things would be exactly as I'd told my wife before she left. We'd move forward as a couple, but with counseling for sure. However, I also had to plan for the worst. Plus, I wouldn't be able to afford counseling or many other things if I couldn't find a job. Catherine wouldn't be over until Tuesday night to help with dinner, because I had an interview that afternoon with a construction company across town that did a lot of work in Ohio during the winter. After I finished, I checked in on the kids, then hit the pillow. I woke up refreshed and pulled out the paperwork I had reviewed the night before. The paperwork Susan left me. At precisely 8 o'clock, I dialed the number that was provided. I had to be quiet because the kids were on summer break, except for my daughter's soccer game, and still in bed. Right away, I discovered that there was a 3-hour time difference, so I would need to try again later. It gave me time to review what I would say, think of answers I might get in return, and calm myself enough not to react impulsively. From 11 to 11:30, I was transferred multiple times and spent way too much time listening to elevator music, too many emergency numbers. Instead, it was an exercise in extreme patience. Eventually, the man himself, Mark Jenkins, the show's executive producer, answered. After his formal greeting, I got straight to the point. "My name is Dante Benjamin. I need to get my wife off your show." I was assertive. "Oh, Mr. Benjamin, is it?" I could hear his patronizing tone over the phone. "I'd be happy to address your concerns and answer any questions, but I'm afraid that we have a contract with your wife, Teresa. The show must go on, as they say." I trusted that he'd play it this way, and I was feeling more positive about how I would resolve this situation. "She signed that contract without my knowledge," I began. "I have to believe that based on other reality shows I've seen, she was either tricked or coerced." "We would never coerce a potential contestant to be part of one of our productions," he confidently said, cutting me off. "That would be unethical, and it would certainly bring scrutiny, if not legal action. I'm sorry that you and your wife may have had some communication issues, but I assure you that she knows exactly how the show works, how to win the prize money, and today she, along with all the other contestants, is being briefed on all the minor contingencies of the rules, including decorum, what is and is not allowed." "Well then, tell me about the show." I wanted him to see me as emotional, addressing all my concerns. "I'd be happy to," he said to me. "But first you need to understand that, like any production of this nature, certain aspects are going to be unveiled in real time." I didn't respond, so he continued. "You might ask things that I can't or won't answer, either because they are integral to the success of the production or because they haven't happened yet." "What do the contestants have to do to win?" I asked plainly. "I'm going to pass on that one, Mr. Benjamin," he said, coming across as exasperated. "Because I'm a busy man, and I'm pretty sure I know what you're going to ask. What I can tell you is that in my line of work, sex sells. Otherwise we'd be staging a show like this somewhere other than a tropical island. Your wife is going to be seen on TV in a bikini smaller than 2 sizes too small for her, right?" Yeah, that's the answer, but remember, she agreed to it. Is there going to be some sexual innuendo? Of course, but it's a family show that airs in prime time. Are there going to be challenges where the contestants need to complete some suggestive scenarios? Sure, but no more than some of the performances you've seen on Dancing with the Stars. But how do they win? I was undeterred. That's for us to know, he was still smug, and for you and the whole country to find out. What I can tell you, without giving too much away, is that like all of our productions of this nature, there's a twist. Something that the contestants are going to have to figure out for themselves if they want a chance to win the grand prize. And Mr. Benjamin, I can say with certainty that you're going to be quite pleased with that twist as well, assuming your wife has enough common sense to maintain her moral compass. Jenkins abruptly ended the call, not allowing me to ask anything further, and told me to have a nice day. 10 minutes later, I made 2 calls, then I went into my Fidelity account and withdrew $10,000 of my $14,246.0. The rest could go to taxes. I looked at the weather app, saw that it was already 95 degrees outside, and turned on the AC full blast. I planned on leaving it that way. That night, the kids and I had a decent, comfortable meal. Molly led the conversation, talking about friends at school and how everyone was excited that Susan was on a major game show. Not just our family because of the size of the town, but probably everyone knew what was going on. I felt better about my plan, and for a few self-advising seconds, I reaffirmed the need to protect myself and the family in case the worst happened. To me, there was about a 90% chance that Jenkins was just hyping things up. If he'd struck a deal, he'd said so himself. Whatever the producers were going to throw at Susan and the rest, I didn't know, but I didn't trust my wife to figure it out either. Susan was quick-tempered and headstrong. She was a good person, for sure. However, it was those very character flaws that had led me down the path I was on. Those traits meant that she'd jump to conclusions and decide to act before she could see the end game. Susan was also a great wife and mother. I almost felt sorry for the storm that was about to break on her life, but she had created the situation she was in. She did that without my involvement too. Catherine cooked dinner the next night, always busy with my kids. I noticed how easily she drew the kids into conversation. She also kept glancing at me. After dinner, Enzo and Molly helped clean up the kitchen, then went to meet their friends. Catherine poured us each a glass of wine, and we sat at the table. How was your interview? She genuinely wanted to know. I think it went well, I told her. It actually had. I felt like I might be hired by the end of the week, even though it would be a step back from design. How do you feel, Dante, about this whole thing? I knew what she was asking. I'm not sure, I admitted. I think I'm still in shock. Probably, she said with a hint of irony. But I think the initial shock has worn off. What I see in your eyes today is, I guess it's resolve. You seem like you figured something out, or maybe you haven't but you're planning anyway. I was shocked, but I tried not to show it. Catherine had been a family friend for so long, but I hadn't expected her to be able to read me like that. I don't have the foresight or a crystal ball, Catherine, I replied. But I have to protect my family in case things go sideways on that show. I'm not going to let my kids or myself become a public laughingstock. Catherine took a sip of her wine thoughtfully. I understand. Dante, can I ask you something? Before Susan surprised you with this, did you think you two had a good marriage? A great marriage, maybe even? Yes, I answered truthfully. And then I want to give you a piece of advice, and because I care about everyone involved, it's all it is. Can you try to let Susan work this out on her own? Give her the benefit of the doubt and let things play out. I have a feeling that she'll quickly realize she's in over her head and see the error of her ways. What she does with that realization is what matters when she comes back to the family. Can you give her that chance? I'll try, I said to Catherine. Actually, I can pretty much guarantee I'll try. The company called me the next morning and congratulated me, offering me the job. They asked if I could come in for orientation on Friday, and I told them I'd be there. I had finally gotten another job. On Thursday night, Catherine and the kids sat in the living room, waiting excitedly, while I held my breath for the premiere of the first episode. The private island was small, and just south of Basse-Terre Island in the British West Indies that most people called Guadaguado. I was surprised to see the title of the show Desire Island flashing across the screen. Just one more thing I'd need to add to the lies list. The women were from all across the US and one from Canada. 28 of them ranging in age from 26 to 44. Susan was average age but definitely one of the hottest women, wearing the tiny bikinis that they all wore. All the women were interviewed as to where they lived, what their lives were like, and a little about their families. Only 10 were childless. All of them were in serious relationships. Most were married. As I calculated interview after interview, my stomach began to churn. Catherine noticed, and instead of getting me a beer during the commercial break, she came back with my favorite scotch and water. After reiterating the premise of the game and the rules for the television audience, the women and the much younger and more muscular men were given their first task. The men were all in their mid to late 20s, and each of them looked like the best-looking guy you'd ever pull out of a huge crowd. The first task turned out to be more of an insult to their actual first task. The women were told that they needed to pair up with one of the men they thought was both intelligent and strong if they wanted to get to the second week. The final 10 minutes showed the men and women sitting around the pool drinking fruit cocktails and getting to know each other in the tropical heat. The women had a big house and the men were right next door. I figured it was just to titillate the viewers. Susan was shown in the hallway inside the house, next to one of the bathrooms, whispering to Jules, a hot blonde a year younger than my wife. The two of them had figured out one of the unwritten rules: align yourself with the person you're competing with. They'd asked some basic questions to try and discern if they could trust each other. After they got as much information as they could from each other, Jules told Susan that she had a plan for the two of them to get the top 2 contestants for tomorrow's challenge. In return, all she expected from Susan was to never vote her off the island during the contestant meetings. To me, it seemed Jules was playing Susan for a fool, but I was more deeply concerned. I was relieved when the show ended, and it wasn't just Catherine who noticed my physical discomfort. Molly looked at me with a mixture of curiosity and concern. "Geez, Dad," she said emotionally. "You're not happy, no? You're really worried about Mom, right?" "Sis," Enzo chimed in to defend me. As a near adult, he must have figured it out, or maybe had some of the same concerns I did. "How would you like it if your boyfriend was one of the male contestants? Chasing all those hot babes," he trailed off. Molly wisely didn't answer that question. "Ubu," Enzo was about to say. Catherine laughed and I did, too. There was no other option. The kids ran upstairs and Catherine reached for me. "See, not that bad," she tried to sound confident. "I think she handled it well." And she did, I had to admit. But she's still going around in a swimsuit 2 sizes too small for her. Friday was one of those rare days when you feel like you're suspended in midair, and that's exactly how I felt. The heat wave was not supposed to end until the following Monday, and I had used the silver window covering on my car to add a little more deodorizer. Orientation went well, as nothing was new for me. It was just different procedures. That night, Catherine did a great thing by getting me to talk about everything that had happened to her and the kids during dinner. She knew I was hurting, not having my wife there to share my big day. My kids were genuinely excited for me. It was weird that they never asked about the AC. We sat down to watch Susan on TV. Right away, there was a change. Of the 28 female contestants, half had been sent home. Almost an equal number of men had been kicked off, too. The host spent way too much time being vague about the reason why, but it certainly stirred up viewer interest in speculating what kind of unwritten rules had caused this. The next challenge would involve more brains than brawn, and the field would be cut in half again. 7 female contestants would remain, along with 8 male contestants. Because the focus was on the ladies, a quick calculation told me that the show would eventually be down to just 2 women. The host didn't reveal anything about the upcoming task, but encouraged the women to get to know their partners really intimately in a flirtatious way. Of course, he told them with a toothy grin. So then he told them to make sure their partners knew as much as possible, and even more if they wanted a chance to win the big prize. The men and women were free to stay with their partner from the previous challenge or change partners, but that had to be done that night, who knew how the show was edited. The rest of the show was contestants pairing up. My wife had almost no airtime. Susan stayed with her guy, Bennett, but because Jules was one of the casualties, she started a new alliance with a woman named Ivy. After the show, Catherine kept me busy by reviewing every detail of my schedule for the next 2 weeks. We needed to do that, but I couldn't help thinking how sweet and thoughtful she was being. I was going to be out of town from Monday to Wednesday and would be back midday Thursday from a job site in Toledo. Catherine offered to stay at my house with the kids, although we both knew they were old enough to take care of themselves. Given all the changes, I agreed right away. "Catherine," I started, "can I ask you something personal?" "Sure, I guess," she smiled but was a little hesitant. "Why don't you ever remarry?" I saw her face change. "Sorry. That's way too personal." "No," she replied. "No, I just didn't expect that." She took a deep breath and exhaled. "I loved my husband Dale with everything I had. He was a great man, in addition to being the love of my life. I never liked him being in the military, so I guess if I had one thing to complain about, that would be it. The fact that it took him from me forever was almost too much to bear at first." "That first year was almost debilitating," she continued, taking a sip of coffee. "I saw him in my waking hours. I dreamed about him at night. The dreams only differed in location and circumstance. We were always separated, sometimes only by inches. I couldn't reach him and he couldn't reach me. The look in his eyes, just before I would abruptly wake up, was probably a reflection of my expression for him. It always conveyed a deep sadness and a regret that he couldn't perform that simple task, reach out 4 or 5 more inches and take my hand. There was a deep and genuine sorrow there." "He sounds like an extraordinary man," I said respectfully. "He was," she agreed. "The dreams eventually faded, but my memories didn't. Then I started to realize that I was trading my life for memories, and he would never want that. I'd never want that for him if things were reversed. So I started to live again." "I'm sorry we can't pay you more." I felt guilty at that point. "Money is not, and was not a problem for me," she smiled weakly. "In my humble opinion, the government does more for the dead than the injured. With death benefits, insurance, and lifetime military pensions, I'm okay." Dale also had a private life insurance policy that his uncle sold him. I never expected them to pay, but they did. I don't owe anything on the house or the car, and my monthly income is far in excess of my expenses. Still, I was going to say, but she waved her hand to stop me. "So, to answer your question," she concluded, "I haven't found him yet. The next love of my life. I've forced myself out into the world doing charity work, helping your family. I even joined the Widow's Bridge Club for a while. I was the youngest and decided it wasn't for me. When I meet him, I'll know." Catherine's story was so moving that I found myself giving her a big hug. She graciously accepted and then told me to get some sleep as she headed out the front door. I laid in bed that night thinking about Catherine and her sad story. What struck me the most was the comparison between Susan and my relationship with her deceased husband, Dale. Susan was driven. Back then I had been too. That didn't mean I wasn't still that way, but things hadn't gone as Susan or I had hoped or planned. Of course, we'd had 2 great kids, but I couldn't help thinking Susan saw me as a loser. She'd never said it, but the idea might have simmered, causing her to think she needed to be in control, even for a short 8 weeks. If that was the case, in remembering our lives together in my mind, I started to see it for the value it had. Susan and I had a bigger problem than any sexual shenanigans the television show could have gotten her caught up in. Plus, I knew that I would never tolerate the blatant disrespect or public humiliation she'd brought upon me on that island. Things shifted for me the following week. First, I got the new job and I turned all my attention to that. On Tuesday night, I went out to a small sports bar in Toledo and had a few beers with the guys so I could get to know my new coworkers. On Wednesday, I took a day off, ordered a small pizza to bring back to my room so I could watch Susan. The show started off a little differently and showed the contestants acting more like couples. Susan was still paired with Bennett, the 26-year-old tanned, fit, and witty guy. The hardest part for me was the private time the contestants had, especially my wife with Bennett. They sat by the pool, telling each other everything about themselves, swinging on a hammock together, talking about their future dreams. The mere closeness made me want to divorce her when she got home. She never said anything that offended me. In fact, Bennett seemed fairly cunning to me. He spent a lot of time asking about her high school and college years and her aspirations then. I figured he was softening her up to trust him so he could start talking about me later. However, each time Bennett got a little intimate or too personal in his conversations, Susan quickly pulled away from him and politely said goodnight. It occurred to me that maybe there was an unwritten rule hanging over everyone's head that might have something to do with fidelity. Maybe restraining your lust on Desire Island was the key to winning. At the end of the show, the women and men were given a series of clues, things they were supposed to know about their partners, but the twist was that they needed to figure out the answer hidden all over the compound, including the beach. That included both houses, so the guys could go rummaging through the women's personal items and vice versa. We weren't going to get the winning results until the next show. Time flew by. I went to work and came home to the family on Thursday days, spending time with the kids. They were growing up and didn't need me as much anymore, but I still enjoyed being around them. Catherine, the neighbor and family friend, was always there to help out. The peaceful weekend nights with her had become a familiar part of my life. Candid conversations, nothing was off limits. By the fourth week of the show, an unexpected event happened, but it wasn't Susan being eliminated. The viewers voted, and while it was unclear if Susan and Bennett had rigged a response, or maybe Bennett was just that smart, I'd never really know the truth. The question Bennett was faced with at the campfire ceremony was about how much money Susan wanted to have saved when she retired after she'd graduated from college. It seemed like a simple question, but Bennett found the answer by rifling through Susan's personal bag and discovering the answer attached to her toothpaste tube. "I just thought she was lying," Bennett proclaimed eloquently around the campfire when confronted. If she and her dad were truly on track, she wouldn't be doing this show. An old adage popped into my head. Do you kiss your lover with that lying mouth? So I decided to check her toothpaste. There was no denying it. The remaining contestants lauded Bennett's action. And of course, Susan, my wife, was safe for another round. Yet, I couldn't help feeling a sense of rot inside me whenever I thought about how that event had played out, especially since I knew full well that my wife had never graduated from college. The next challenge was for the guys to teach the girls how to surf. Something the host warned the audience about was that, if anyone lied, they'd be immediately eliminated, and the first girl to successfully ride a wave would be safe. Ivy was the first to succeed, and she was granted immunity. Susan, on the other hand, struggled as Bennett patiently helped her understand how to balance on the board. There were numerous moments between them, physical touches on the beach, then in the water, which seemed no surprise, but all were crystal clear to me when Susan fell hard, and Bennett became the hero, diving into the water to rescue her. Though watching that scene, I felt nothing. Maybe because I was used to it, resigned. Every time I reminded myself how much the directors and production crew might have cut out to make the final footage, I didn't really care. Since Susan left, I'd had a plan in my head and I knew what I had to do. Catherine must have sensed the shift in me, and one day she asked, "Are you feeling better?" I answered that I was feeling much better. Unexpectedly, Catherine warned, "Remember, Dante, we're only halfway through this. Things can still change." I nodded in agreement. Catherine wasn't saying it to put me down, but just a gentle reminder of what I already knew. That was something I always appreciated about her. Work required me to be out of town the following week, and because of the tight deadline, I worked late every day. No time to watch the show. Lucky for me, we finished early on Thursday morning, and I was able to get home sooner than usual. Walking into the house, I thought it was empty. But as I climbed the stairs, I heard water running and Catherine's voice from the bathroom. It occurred to me that I hadn't been intimate with anyone, even since the last time Susan used me as a tool. My mind raced as I looked through the partially open bathroom door. Steam fogged up the bathroom mirror, and I could only see the outline of a woman inside. As Catherine stepped out, wrapped in a towel, I stood there, my eyes locked on her alluring form. "Dante, you scared me." Catherine jumped as she saw me. "What are you doing home? Is everything okay?" I didn't answer, just looked deep into her eyes and opened my arms. Catherine watched me silently, and when she realized what was happening, she smiled, stepped into my arms, letting the towel fall, and we both surrendered to an irresistible, passionate kiss. We had a night of intense passion at first, an explosion of emotion and desire. Then, as we slowed down, savoring each other, it became gentler and more subtle. We explored each other, taking our time, letting everything unfold naturally. Even though things between Catherine and me were deepening, we were both acutely aware of what would happen when Susan returned. It was something neither of us wanted to face or even mention. I was back on the job site from Monday to Thursday. Circumstances didn't allow us to see each other again, but we'd pass each other with knowing smiles or winks to let the other know they were still there. What would happen when Susan got back was something neither of us wanted to discuss. Catherine filled me in on every detail when I got back home. So did the kids. Everyone was excited that Susan was still in the running. I was surprised she'd made it this far and also surprised that she wasn't paying a price for it. Actually, I was starting to be a little proud of her. Most of the women at the campfire had determined that Susan was their biggest threat and, as a result, had tried to vote her off. Ivy had helped prevent that, and when the votes were tied, they had to do it again. The second time, Susan was saved by a single vote. The following week, the remaining contestants were taken to a Polynesian luau, nothing to do with the Atlantic, but certainly a TV proking production. Bennett danced with my wife, as did everyone else. All of them danced with multiple partners. One of the guys seemed to have gotten a little free with my wife, or at least his hand was blurred as the camera caught it going down her lower back. So later, on their favorite hammock, Bennett gently confessed to Susan that the other guy, Rob, had made him jealous. My wife laughed and Bennett responded with a pained look. He admitted that he had fallen for her and asked her if she felt the same way. When Susan explained that while she had grown closer to him, she also loved her husband and family, Bennett upped his game, bad-mouthing me to her and asking if I loved her that much. Why had I sent her to compete on the show? Susan did the right thing and explained that she was the mastermind behind the whole thing and had kept it from me until it was too late for me to stop her. I had to admit to myself that I was proud of my wife again and how she handled herself, especially as she navigated the difficult road and rebuked Bennett at every turn. She ended the night by keeping his advances at bay, only allowing a kiss. In a small way, I felt sorry for the kid. The final challenge of the show was a three-way hike for the last three women remaining, Susan, Ivy, and Bobby. They were split into three different directions on a mountain, and the task was little more than a silly Easter egg hunt, which made me laugh at its absurdity. But things became more dramatic when the host began to reveal to the viewers that the male contestants were going to try to seduce the women during the final challenge. By this point, everyone from the female contestants to the viewers at home understood that anyone who allowed their emotions to get the best of them would lose their chance at the grand prize. Which man could push the situation to the max but not get rejected would be the winner. As the host put it, this was no longer a test of physicality but a battle of wills. I must admit, all of us family and friends who were watching together were on the edge of our seats, no doubt anxious. My kids were old enough to understand the implications of what their mother might be up to. Susan had played the game very shrewdly throughout, but both me and the kids agreed that Ivy seemed to be playing it better. Even Catherine thought so. The entire household was waiting for Susan to maybe just come home with the consolation prize. But we still had to watch the final episode to see the outcome. I was back in Toledo for my job, but the finale was not something I could miss. I sat alone, eating pizza and drinking cold beers like the nights before, but this time the tension was nearly consuming me. The 2 hours of the show seemed to drag on forever, and were just as boring as any other reality TV show. During the final challenge, each of the women had to go with their male partner to find a personally meaningful item on the mountain. My wife, Susan, had more airtime than the other two contestants, but that didn't make me any more comfortable. Especially Bennett, Susan's partner, he just wouldn't stop talking, which annoyed me to no end. Susan played along with everything he said, even opening herself up to Bennett to believe something might happen between them. Most of their conversations were centered around me, Susan's husband. She definitely admitted that I was still unemployed and our relationship was on shaky ground. These were things she'd shared publicly with the whole world, and while it hurt, the truth was hard to deny. As the two of them climbed the mountain, Bennett kept trying to get closer to Susan, even gently putting his hand on her back to show his affection. They walked through rugged terrain, and then, like magic, they found a small golden box wedged between some branches. Susan, of course, didn't miss an opportunity as she climbed up, and Bennett was there to give her a hand on her ass, too. When I saw them find the box, I knew exactly what was in it, a promise ring. Bennett got down on his knees in front of my wife on that breathtaking mountaintop, professing his love and promising to wait for her, slipping the ring onto her ring finger. He even said that he'd replace my wedding band with his when she was ready. Susan didn't deny Bennett's kiss. They shared a long kiss, and only when Susan pulled away did Bennett almost lose his balance, nearly falling into her. That moment was priceless. His flustered expression was worth watching. Bobby, the other contestant, broke her promise and decided to spend the night on the mountain with her male partner, Rob. Ivy also chose the same path when she spent the night in an oversized sleeping bag with John, who was nicknamed Skeeter on the show. While no one could be sure what was happening inside that sleeping bag, one thing was clear: nothing on screen was ever actually like real life. As time ticked away, all I could do was wait and see if Susan would come in first or second. I knew for sure that Bobby was out. But then, when they announced that Susan was the winner with a grand prize of $350,000, I almost dropped my beer. My kids called right away. They were so excited that I could barely understand what they were saying. Catherine was equally thrilled when she called me. "Dante, I can't believe it. She won, she actually won." I just stayed silent. Catherine noticed my silence and slowed down. "Are you okay, Dante?" she asked, her voice laced with concern. "That must have been hard for you." I muttered, "Not harder than I was prepared for." "Dante, I know," Catherine tried to choose her words. "I know how it looks, but she didn't do anything. It must be worth something. Don't think she just took advantage of the situation. She wasn't disrespectful to you." I felt, in that moment, almost betrayed by my kind neighbor more than I had been by my own wife. "I have to go, Catherine." I tried to keep the disappointment from leaking into my voice. "Dante, wait," Catherine almost pleaded. "That's not what I meant. Family, the kids and friends in town, they're all watching and they see my wife abandon her lover to win a prize." I interrupted, my voice cold. "And they also see that I mean nothing to her. I have to go. Tell the kids to stay up late." "Dante." Catherine called again, but I had already hung up. That night, I tossed and turned in my motel bed, replaying the events of that night over and over in my head. My heart ached with thoughts of what Susan had said on screen, the things about me, about my life and my failures. Even though she was honest and everyone saw it, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was diminished, worthless in her eyes. But to everyone else, friends, family, even the whole town, Susan might be seen as a hero who sacrificed for her family, enduring anything to give us a better future. The next morning, after tending to the kids and dealing with the excitement from both sets of parents, I finally got to lay down in my bed. It was a relief to be back in my familiar room after all the stress. For the first time in 8 long weeks, I heard Susan's voice that afternoon, about 3 o'clock. She was brimming with pride and excitement, recounting her adventure. I tried to match her enthusiastic pace, although a small part of me sank. Her plane would land tomorrow evening at 7:30. On Thursday night, my mind wandered to a different place. Tomorrow, my wife would be coming home, a winner, confident and full of vim and vigor. She would remind me of the promise she'd kept, at least in part. But what worried me most wasn't her victory or her promise. I'd spent all the money in our small retirement account. I had a new job, but if what I feared was actually happening, my marriage was probably over and it would be my fault. I'd prepared myself for this. The plan I had come up with since Susan had left was almost complete. If everything played out as I anticipated, this marriage was definitely a lost cause. And even if it ended peacefully, maintaining a friendly relationship with Susan would be incredibly difficult. This weekend was the last one where I could really enjoy my family before everything fell apart. When Susan returned, she rushed into my arms. The airport was only about 20 minutes from her parents' house and about 25 more to ours. Early on Friday morning, they called, practically begging me to let them pick her up. I agreed, but Susan didn't run straight to the kids like she usually did. "I love you, buddy," she whispered in my ear, before turning to the kids with a beaming smile. A few minutes later, my parents arrived, and 10 minutes after that, Peter and his family showed up. Catherine appeared soon after, walking right into the front door without knocking. It was truly a party. I tried to enjoy the celebratory mood, although my heart was heavy. Everyone was laughing and talking, but as the party started to move into deeper conversations, I quietly slipped out, going out onto the porch for some peace and quiet. A moment later, I felt someone stand next to me, looking out into the distance. It was Catherine. "The weight of the world, eh?" she asked softly, her voice soothing, more wise than her years. "Something like that," I replied nonchalantly. "Do you want to talk about it?" Catherine looked at me with empathy. I could sense her genuine concern. She almost wanted to hug me, but we both knew that couldn't happen, yet. "No," I stammered, feeling the conflict inside me. "I can't." "Okay," she replied softly, turning back towards the house. "You know where to find me if you need to." The party ended around 11 at night. Catherine had quietly left earlier, as she often did when she sensed the tension was too thick. Susan hugged the kids tight, not stopping to express her joy to be home with them. I was cleaning up the kitchen when I felt her lean against me. "Honey, let's save the cleanup for tomorrow," she said, not just a suggestion but clearly a request. My emotions were truly complex. My love and trust had been pushed to the breaking point, and I found myself struggling to plaster a smile on my face for Susan. But I knew I was failing miserably. The words that had haunted me since that Friday, July 4th, were still echoing in my mind. Susan sensed something, and her face changed instantly. She turned silently and walked up the stairs. I locked the door, shut everything off, and trudged up to our room. As I entered the room, Susan was waiting just inside the door. She shut the door behind me, and I felt the space around me contract. The air grew heavy, and I knew something was coming. "Dante," she started, her voice sweet and full of love. "I know. Everyone, our family, our friends, the viewers across the country, they might see me as a celebrity, a hero. And maybe, from their perspective, that's true. But I know that I owe you a huge debt. I have so much to make up to you. To compensate for what I've done, for the pain I've caused, and for what happened on that island." Susan gently touched my cheek, her voice trembling with regret. "I know I need to do everything to help you heal, to prove how much I love you." She paused, her eyes searching for forgiveness in mine. I took a deep breath and slowly exhaled, nodding at her. Susan seemed to relax and continued, "So I want us to just hold each other tonight, do nothing else, just be close. I want to sleep next to you, the man I love. And tomorrow I want us to make love. If you don't want to, I'll understand, but I think we both need it." I didn't speak, but she seemed happy to see me nod in agreement. I changed, just into shorts and a t-shirt, like I always did. Susan, however, was bolder, wearing only her panties as she got into bed. We lay side by side, silent. My mind raced with thoughts of what had happened, of what I didn't yet know, and whether we had any chance of getting through this. If she was being honest, I was the only one who'd committed a crime by doing something behind her back. Guilt started to creep in. But I wasn't sure if we could both get past this, even if Susan hadn't done anything wrong. All night, I just lay there trying to decide how to move forward. But by morning I chose to live in the moment with her and devote all my energy to that. The next morning, Susan outed herself. We had a night of passionate intimacy that I couldn't remember the last time we'd had. She wasn't wild, but she was energetic and very connected, making me feel like I was back in the early days of our marriage. I couldn't help comparing it to my private moment with Catherine, and it made me feel even more conflicted. But in the end, I relished that night. The next morning, I was just about to pour myself a cup of joe, wanting some quiet time, when I heard a blood-curdling scream from upstairs. Susan and I exchanged glances, our eyes filled with worry. I dropped my coffee and raced up the stairs. Halfway up, I saw Molly, my daughter, with a bewildered look on her face, running down towards me. "Oh my God, Dad," she cried out in panic, waving her phone in front of me, as if I could see everything from it. "Did you see this?" Her voice cracked, almost out of control, and tears started streaming down her cheeks. How could she do that? Molly slowly calmed down, but the tears wouldn't stop. "I'm going to be the laughingstock of the school, Dad, for months." I listened as my heart clenched. Susan was now standing at the foot of the stairs, looking distraught and afraid. Her face seemed frozen, unable to understand what was going on. "Calm down, Bunny," I said to my daughter, trying to sound reassuring. "Come downstairs and tell your mom what in the hell you're talking about." But Molly just looked at me with resentful eyes, like she couldn't recognize me. "I won't share a room with that bitch," Molly yelled, her voice full of indignation. She turned and ran back up to her room, not before shouting from a distance, "You need to watch Desire Island After Dark, Dad, and you should watch it Wadon." I stood there, stunned on the staircase, looking down at Susan. She didn't dare meet my gaze, her face pale, then she let out a deep sigh and silently walked away. I walked into my study and turned on my computer. It took me only a few minutes to find the video Molly was referring to. It was the After Dark version of the show Susan had been on. I'd seen a couple of programs like this, but this time I knew I couldn't keep my composure. While I'd controlled Molly's access, Enzo, my son, at 17, wasn't bound by those restrictions. He'd definitely find the video and watch his mother in all her shame. I tried to stay calm as I started the video. The dim blue light of the night camera flickered on the screen, starting to record what was happening in the room. In the corner of the bed, Susan was kneeling, her back facing the camera. In front of her was Bennett and Skeeter. Skeeter was in front, and from the camera's position we could only see Susan's hand and mouth busy with the young man. Later she turned towards Bennett, who was standing behind her. Things continued in this manner, and when Bennett grabbed her hair, muttering something, I couldn't take it anymore. "Okay, honey," Bennett moaned, his voice hoarse. "That's it, keep going." Skeeter stood there, unable to control himself, his hand gripping whatever was standing upright. I didn't need to see any more. I got up and left the room, my stomach churning. I must have sat there for 20 minutes before I was strong enough to walk out to the kitchen. Molly was sitting there, staring at the wall. I approached her, trying to look as calm as possible, but feeling like I was sinking into an abyss. "You okay, kiddo?" I asked a question I knew was stupid. Molly turned to me, her eyes cold, an expression too mature for a teenage girl. "Where's Mom?" I continued, knowing the answer. "I don't have a mom," she answered coldly. "If you're asking about the woman who betrayed our family, she ran out before I could tell her what I thought of her." I didn't know what to say. Before I could open my mouth, Molly continued. "Why did she do that, Dad?" Her voice cracked, breaking into sobs, tears streaming down her face. "How could she do that? She must have known this would happen. What was she thinking?" "Language, daughter," I tried to keep my voice stern, but in this situation, it wasn't going to work. Molly started to chuckle, and just a moment later her laughter spread, grew louder, until she was in full hysterics. My daughter's laughter always moved me, and this time was no different. I couldn't help but laugh with her. Soon we were both crying tears, but tears of release. Just then, Enzo burst into the kitchen, having clearly seen the video. He stopped mid-stride, confused. "What's so funny?" he asked, his voice heavy. All three of us hugged each other, feeling the shared pain that none of us could articulate. Then I continued to make breakfast, and we sat down to eat together, talking. It had been a long time since I'd had a real conversation with both of my kids. While the topic was heavy, I felt closer to them. "What are you going to do next?" Enzo asked, his voice serious. I'd anticipated this question, but I wasn't prepared for the answer. "That's the million-dollar question, Enzo," I replied sincerely. "Right now I can't answer you." "You're not going to stay with Mom, are you?" He hesitated. "No, son," I sighed. "That's pretty clear." Molly silently got up from the table, heading for the bathroom. Enzo, admitting that he couldn't face his mother, left to meet his friends. I sat down in front of my computer, opened my banking app, and realized that Susan's prize money had been deposited into our account. I split the money, subtracting out the prize money, and transferred my portion to a new account. But before leaving, I took $3,000 from Susan's share. I'd pay her back if necessary, but I didn't think she'd notice. Driving aimlessly, I just felt empty. My heart wrestled with staying for the kids or walking away from everything. The more I thought about it, the more I realized there was no going back in this marriage. All the years, all the effort we'd put into each other seemed like a void. When I got home around 5 o'clock, the house was dark and unnaturally quiet. Susan sat at the kitchen table, a bottle of wine in her hand, her eyes staring blankly down into her glass, as if she was lost in another world. She glanced at me when I walked in, but her gaze didn't dare make direct contact. "Why?" I asked, but it was more than a question. My voice was emotionless, hollow. What was the point? Susan didn't look up, her eyes still glued to the glass. "As a reward," she replied, her voice subdued. "Perfect," I answered with a hint of sarcasm. "So, what was last night? A reward for this stupid husband?" She didn't reply, not even a twitch. The silence stretched out, heavier than the stillness of the house. "I don't know what's going to happen," I said, my voice cold and distant. "But I can't be here with you right now. I'm going to leave for a while. Maybe I'll come home tomorrow, maybe next week." I turned and walked up the stairs, and halfway there, I heard a faint "I'm sorry" from her, but it was too late. I packed my things in the summer heat. The heat wave seemed to have taken hold of everywhere, but as I sweated while I wrestled with my suitcase, I suddenly realized the AC was off. She didn't even bother to keep the house cool in this sweltering heat. "I'll let you know when I'm back," I growled as I dragged my duffel bag and backpack out the door. Then I yelled louder, "And if I come back and that damn AC is still off, I'm going to rip it off the wall and stuff your head in it like a hat. You took all the money, At least let the kids get some rest, if they ever come home again. I'm not the type to sit around and have self-pity parties. I'd had enough bad days with the woman I'd once thought I'd grow old with. But even so, I wasn't afraid to try something new. I found a new beer that looked interesting at a shop near the motel and brought a couple of bottles with me. It was a relief to be out of the hesitation and uncertainty, leaving everything behind, even when I knew that the real storm was still waiting ahead. On Monday morning, I went to my new office, ready for my first day on the job, but I was immediately called into the supervisor's office. Naturally, the thought in my head was that I'd made some mistake in the reports with all the chaos in my personal life. "Take a seat, Mr. Benjamin," the head of the firm said, his tone serious. "I presume you read the paper this morning." I hadn't, but I had a pretty good idea what was waiting for me. "No, I didn't," I started, trying to sound calm. "But yes, she's my wife and probably won't be for much longer." "I understand," he said flatly. "However, our company needs to maintain its reputation. I've built this business on integrity, and while this might seem like a personal issue for you, I don't think so." He went silent, waiting for me to respond, but I already knew what was coming. "I'll honor your 90-day probationary period," he continued. "I'm sorry, Mr. Benjamin." And just like that, I was out of a job. At least I had a new bank account to receive my final check. Not knowing where to go, I drove through familiar streets until I found myself pulling up in front of Catherine's house. She was standing at the door, seemingly expecting me. "Come on in, Dante," she said softly. "Can I get you something to drink?" I took the tea she offered and began to tell her the story. When I mentioned that I'd lost my job, her face grew even sadder. And we talked about the kids, about the impact this crisis had had on them. They weren't kids anymore. Catherine kept saying "I'm sorry" to the point where I asked her to stop. It was the shock of reality, of shattered hopes, like someone putting everything on one hand and getting dealt nothing. Then she asked me what I planned to do next. "I can't go home right now," I admitted, the weariness in my voice evident. One wrong word is like dropping a match into a gas tank. I would never hurt her physically, but... "Can you run away?" Catherine asked unexpectedly, her voice almost pleading. "Run away?" I asked back, surprised. "You mean leave here?" "Yes," she whispered. "Somewhere where you can think. I'll be good company. And I promise not to push if you don't want to." She paused for a moment, her cheeks flushing a bit. "I'm conflicted too. I care about Susan, she used to be my friend, but if you get divorced, I wouldn't mind taking your side. I wouldn't be the reason for your marriage falling apart." I looked at Catherine for a long time, surprised by the sincerity in her words. "I won't let that happen," I said with conviction. "If we have to wait to get clothes, you'll understand, right?" "Dante, don't blame yourself," she said with empathy. "We're all adults, and everything happens for a reason. My guilt has disappeared since seeing that video." "Okay," I said, starting to like this idea. "So where to?" Catherine looked at me, a little hesitant. "I've always wanted to go to Miami." Her statement held a sweetness I'd never noticed before. It seemed like the first time we'd flirted with each other so naturally. "New York City would be good, too," I chuckled, "but it's probably hotter there than Miami." "Do you want to bring the kids?" she asked with a playful hint. "No," I answered frankly. "They need time with their mom, and maybe this will help them sort through what's going on too." By around 3 in the afternoon, everything was in place. We had plane tickets and booked a hotel right on the beach. August was the off-season, so it wasn't too difficult to find a place. Catherine kept offering to pay, but I refused, mentally deciding to use some of Susan's prize money. Half an hour later, I went back to the house to pack a bigger bag, preparing for a 3-day getaway. We had booked a suite with 2 adjacent rooms. While I was a man and the thought of being in the same hotel with Catherine, an attractive woman, and a good friend made me think, I knew I'd never disrespect her. As I entered the bedroom to pack, Susan appeared, standing there, looking at me for a while before speaking. "I thought you said you had a job," she said, her voice starting to get cold, and I knew it was about to turn into a rage. "I did," I said without bothering to turn around to look at her. "Then why was your car parked in front of Catherine's house all day?" Her anger started to explode, and I wasn't surprised. "I got fired." I turned around, meeting her eyes with the glare of my own. "Thanks to your filthy video, I'm starting over again." They can't fire you for that." Susan reacted immediately. "That's grounds for a lawsuit and we could." "This is an at-will employment state, and I was still on probation," I roared, feeling anger rising. "What the hell were you thinking? I'm taking a vacation before you even think about asking me. Right now, I can't stand to look at you. You have 4 days to explain everything to the kids and try to make things right. I suggest you understand what they're going through. I'll text the kids later, but don't call or text me. We'll deal with this when I get back, got it?" Susan wasn't sad anymore. She was back to being the hard-nosed Irish woman, unwilling to concede and unwilling to hear anything from me. "I know I did wrong," she replied, not even bothering to address me by name. "I don't need you to tell me what to do." "Suddenly, you see that as something bad you did? Huh? How are your parents? Have they seen your glory on television, or are they still in the dark?" "You're really turning into a prick," she hissed, her voice laced with indignation. "No wonder they're not happy with me right now." "Well, you're right," I said, while closing my suitcase ready to leave. "That's a massive understatement." Susan didn't reply. She turned and walked away, leaving a mess in her wake that she didn't know how to clean up. The kids later told me that only her father knew. He had tried to keep it quiet, thinking that if their mom found out she'd be too shocked to handle it. I could only hope that it didn't get back to someone in their mother's bridge club. I threw my bag in the trunk, then drove a loop around the neighborhood before pulling up to Catherine's place. She'd already opened the garage door, clearly not wanting the nosy neighbors to see where we were going. The flight left at 9:20 that night. Catherine looked tired and I understood her feelings. Even so, I still felt a small surge of excitement. Today was bad, but tomorrow was likely to be worse. However, at least by the end of tomorrow, I'd have my answers and I could start dealing with my life. While I had no intention of getting involved with Catherine, even if she'd offered, I was still a man. And she was a longtime friend, not just a caregiver for my children. At this point, I needed a shoulder more than physical intimacy. As Catherine stepped out of the bathroom wearing her long bathrobe, just as I'd predicted, we talked about the plan for the next few days. She said that she wanted to spend the morning sunbathing before it got too hot, and I was all in. The next morning, we had breakfast at the hotel restaurant before she went to change. As Catherine emerged from the bathroom, I couldn't help but gawk at her in her skimpy bikini. She looked incredible at 45. "Catherine, you're beautiful," I blurted out, unable to hide my admiration. "Oh, thank you, Dante," she chuckled. "You always know how to say the right things to make someone feel good." She stepped closer, placing a light kiss on my cheek. In that moment, I realized how many times we'd had these moments, small gestures but full of meaning. Catherine wasn't just a neighbor, she'd become an essential part of my life. We spent the entire morning at the beach, and as we returned to the hotel, I couldn't help but think about everything that had happened. I realized that no matter how bad things had gotten, I still had good friends like Catherine, people who were there for me, even if not in the way I'd once expected. That afternoon, I received a report from the private investigator I'd hired. Everything I'd feared had been confirmed. Susan and Mark, the man she'd met on the show, had been connected long before. They'd attended the same college, and their relationship seemed to be a lot more complicated than I'd known. The pictures and recordings proved that Susan had not only betrayed me on television but also in real life. As I finished reading the report, I knew that both Mark and Susan were going to pay, each in their own way. After about 10 minutes, John, the founder of the company, asked everyone on his team to take a break. He turned to me, his face heavy with sadness. "Dante," John said, his voice soft but with a serious tone, "go out to the lobby and wait. There's a burner phone waiting for you at the front desk. The only number in the contacts is saved. Go somewhere private and call me from that phone. Wait 10 minutes before you call." When I called, John didn't even say hello but got right to the point. "I worry about you, Dante. Some guys in your situation would go crazy, but you're eerily calm. I get the feeling that you've put a lot of thought into revenge and things like that. I don't want to know the details and you shouldn't tell me. So what are you going to do?" I told him the basic plan I had. John frowned, then sighed. "You know you're breaking at least 4 laws, right? And that's not counting the violence. But I understand that you're not easily swayed." He paused for a moment, then continued. "Okay, I'll give you a piece of advice free of charge, but maybe not the wisest advice. And you can't prove anything about their college days, but you do have the power of influence and the court of public opinion. Mark will try to intimidate you. Be ready. Guys like him aren't easily subdued. Stand your ground and let the information trickle out, slowly, until he realizes you're completely in control. I thanked him and took his genuine advice to heart. John also cautioned me not to use that phone for the main call. Go out of the resort and buy another phone at the tourist gift shop, he instructed. I laughed, thinking that seemed extreme, but he quickly reminded me that drug dealers, scam artists, and even terrorists use those kinds of cheap phones. I followed John's instructions, texting Catherine that I needed another 30 minutes and told her to enjoy the sunshine. She replied with a thumbs-up emoji, showing her understanding and patience. I felt a sense of unease creep into my heart as I bought the new phone. What I was about to do had never crossed my mind, even in my wildest dreams. But now, I was playing a different game altogether. When I called, Mark's voice came on the other end, Mark Jenkins. His voice was full of self-importance, as if he was a busy, important man above it all. Dante Benjamin, Mr. Jenkins. I tried to keep my voice casual, making him think I was weak. Oh, Mr. Benjamin, Mark replied, but I could sense a hint of hesitation in his voice. It's good to hear from you again. Calling to thank me and maybe apologize? No need, really. I understand many people don't believe in Hollywood, and most don't understand it either. But you should be proud of your wife. She played the game beautifully, and your whole hometown should be proud of her. He was playing games, clearly trying to impress upon me that everything was over and he was completely innocent. But I knew better. I kept quiet, letting him continue. He chuckled. You know, Benjamin, Mark continued, no one can prove that's your wife in that video. That's why the images are so blurry. His tone was arrogant, completely unaware that he was being played. Excellent, I replied, my voice flat, robotic. So you make money from the show, and then you sell the after-hours videos to make extra cash. I didn't ask, and he didn't deny. But I'm calling about something else, I continued. You should find a private place if you don't want your career to end today. Mark roared back, his voice full of threat. Don't threaten me, Benjamin. I'll have your balls hanging from my fireplace tomorrow morning. I didn't pay any attention to his words. How's the kitty from college, Jenkins? I asked, letting a smugness creep into my tone. Is she as good as the night at your villa? He was silent for a moment, then began to rage. Listen, Schlemiel, he tossed out that weird name. Don't be stupid and try to use anything from that island. I'll take care of you right now. I cut him off. I'm not anywhere you can find me. I'm not planning to sue you. Susan's history. I'm not calling to scare you legally. I'm calling to negotiate. After a moment of silence, he hissed, What do you have? I have your entire plan with Susan. All the evidence of how you got her to play this game and how you deceived me. I've been plotting since before the first show aired. If the money isn't in my account by the end of today, everything gets published on social media. Mark roared back, You can't blackmail me. I smiled. 3 million then? You have no leverage here. Finally, he gave in. I made my demands clear, $3 million, deposited into my account. If not, your career is over. After hanging up, I breathed a sigh of relief. That was probably the biggest gamble of my life. Not long after, the message from the bank arrived, confirming that the money had been transferred. When I got back home, Susan sat in the kitchen, her face set in a mask of anger. I'd been talking to the kids every day, and they told me that their mom had tried to explain and apologize, but their patience had worn thin. Susan looked at me, asking in a rough voice, Where have you been, and who with? I just shrugged. With your neighbor, trying to get my life back. She sighed, flipped over an envelope on the table and pushed it towards me. What did you do with our money? I just chuckled. I've developed a gambling problem, Susan. She sat down, sighing again. Dante, I'm going to divorce you. I laughed, not believing how audacious she was, but it seemed we'd both finally reached this end. For the next few days, I felt a sense of sadness. While I didn't agree with everything Susan said, she was right about some things. We were never the perfect couple, and perhaps I needed to move on. Catherine had been by my side all week, a better friend than ever, and I knew I was starting a new chapter in my life, with her. Right now, I'm sitting next to Catherine, my new wife, just finishing a dance at our daughter Molly's wedding. Everyone around us is laughing and talking happily. They should be, because I didn't skimp on this event. Looking towards the opposite table, I see Susan, my ex-wife, sitting with her new husband. They seem happy, at least for this moment. Catherine breaks my train of thought by handing me 2 ibuprofen pills. My aching knee is a result of a beatdown I received a couple of years ago, and I'm pretty sure Mark Jenkins was behind it. His goons beat me up at a bar in Austin, Texas. Thankfully, 2 bouncers who were on break nearby intervened, otherwise I might not be here. Jenkins later fled to a foreign country. His company was sold to Universal, and finding him seemed pointless. After all, as I told Susan, every action has consequences. Just the thought that I might not be at Molly's wedding sends shivers down my spine. My son Enzo is in no rush to get married, but I'm not worried he'll find the right person at the right time. As Enzo approaches to ask Catherine for a dance, Susan takes the opportunity to scoot her chair closer. She looks at me, her eyes shining. "The ceremony was beautiful, wasn't it?" she says with a bright smile. "Thank you for helping make it so extravagant, and is sure to never forget this day." I just nod slightly, saying nothing. After all, I'd do anything for my daughter to have a memorable wedding. Susan seems to be searching for something in my eyes, but I'm not sure what she hopes to see. "How's your leg?" she asks, as if just to break the silence. "Still hurting?" "Still hurts," I reply, my voice calm. "But time will make things better." An awkward silence settles between us. Then I ask, just to keep the conversation going, "How's the new job? Do you like California?" Susan hesitates, her eyes flitting around for a moment before she answers. "It's okay, it's just different. At least there's no snow." We chuckle lightly as if the tension between us has subsided somewhat, but the awkwardness remains. "I'm sorry for what I did to you, Dante," she says suddenly, her voice sincere. "I've always regretted the shame I brought upon you, and the kids, too." I nod, weighing my response. "I'm sorry too," I say softly, the words unexpected even to myself. Susan looks at me, clearly surprised. "Sorry. For what?" She's a little taken aback, but also a bit skeptical. "You mean sorry for what I did?" "No," I meet her eyes, my voice firm. "I'm sorry that I didn't see the problems in our relationship sooner. We had a lot of issues before Jenkins came along, but I didn't realize. I'm sorry for that, for not seeing it coming." Susan is flustered. Her eyes widen as she hears the name Jenkins. She never seems to have suspected I knew more than she'd thought. "You know about everything," she stammers, as if putting the pieces together in her head. I just offer a wry smile, not saying anything. "Yes, maybe I finally lived up to your expectations. I'll be a little late." She continues to stare at me, trying to understand what I've just said. "I really did wrong," she admits, her voice softening. "I thought I was trying to help you, to help us get through things. When Jenkins made the offer, I just thought of the money. I was wrong. I hurt you deeply." I don't answer right away, giving her time to continue. "I felt so trapped, Dante. I know it doesn't excuse what I did, but at the time I just thought it would help us, and then things spiraled out of control." I sigh, keeping my composure. "It wasn't just the money, Susan. It was the trust. Once it's broken, it can't be fixed." She nods, understanding my meaning. "I know, and I forever regret it." Susan glances towards her new husband, who's dancing with her mother, then her eyes sweep over Catherine and Enzo, and finally return to me. "Thank you, Dante," she says, her voice sincere. "I hope we can maintain a good relationship for the kids' sake. I'll try my best to do that." I just nod slightly. As she turns back to her table, I lean back in my chair, looking towards Catherine and Enzo, my heart full of emotion. My life is not perfect, but I've come close to achieving what I'd hoped for. My architecture firm is thriving, and Catherine, my wife, runs a charity dedicating herself to the community. We have a peaceful, fulfilling life, and most importantly, I know I'm genuinely happy. As Don Draper once said in Mad Men, "What is happiness but a moment before you need more happiness?" And right now, I've found that moment.